Following a 6-week vacation, Congress is back in session. Legislative priorities for the lawmakers include the new North American Free Trade Deal, funding the government, and prescription drug pricing.
Right out of the gate, House Judiciary plans to take up a trio of gun control measures. And during the August recess, there were, of course, at least 4 mass shootings, which prompted renewed calls for action. And meanwhile, in North Carolina, voters are going to the polls in a do-over race that has been in the headlines for almost a year. Some are talking about it as a sort of bellwether. Joining us to discuss how likely it is that we're going to see any movement on any of these initiatives is senior correspondent for The Hill, Mike Lillis. Great to see you, sir.
Good morning.
All right, so what are the priorities here on the agenda for Congress?
Well, the only must-pass thing really is the government spending. The shutdown on October 1st. You know, they paved the way for, they did the kind of the heavy lifting in July when they passed this 2-year budget deal. They set the caps. They got beyond those enormous cuts that everybody, that really nobody wanted, and they lifted the debt ceiling beyond the 2020 presidential election. So those were both enormous steps, but they're only the first step. Second step is they got to pass 12 appropriations bills, and the House has passed 10, the Senate has passed 0. So everybody has already conceded. They're not even pretending that they have enough time in September to do this before a government shutdown would happen. So what they're going to do is kick the can. They're going to punt it with a continuing resolution. We've seen this over and over again, and it sounds like they'll kick it into late November, just up against the Thanksgiving recess. And so government spending is the big must-pass thing that they've got to do.
That's also going up against. There are some grumblings in the Democratic Party right now over impeachment. I know that the House Judiciary Committee has considered it. Nancy Pelosi has said that it's not necessarily where things are going. Where do you see things headed?
You know, we were talking to Chairman Jerry Nadler last night at the votes, and they're playing this semantics game where they're calling it an impeachment investigation or an impeachment inquiry or call it whatever you want.
Right.
But they're not having.
That's not like a constitutionally defined thing. It's just what they've applied.
It is certainly not. It's just a rhetorical device that they're using because they have this energized liberal base that wants them to get very aggressive against Donald Trump. So they're saying, look, we're in the middle of an impeachment inquiry, but then they've got these centrist, moderate, Democrats in these swing districts that they have to protect, and they don't want to have to go back and say we voted on impeachment. We're trying to overturn. The Republicans say this is a witch hunt. They're trying to overturn a president who was elected democratically. So they're trying to protect them, energize the base. And so what they've landed on is we're doing an impeachment inquiry, but we're not going to vote on it. We're not going to force any votes on it. We'll use it as we file these court documents to get some of this disputed witness testimony, to get some of the disputed information from the White House, because they're clearly not being cooperative in all of this. So they're using it as a legal tool, as a legal justification, without actually having to vote on the procedure.
It's like the most Democratic Party thing ever. How can we avoid taking a stand in either direction? Here we go.
That's right. They're walking right down the middle of the line.
What about on guns? The House is looking at some legislation. Any chance that anything that passes the House could get through the Senate?
Sure, I think so. What Mitch McConnell has said, and this was an enormous step for the Senate Majority Leader. He said, I will bring something to the floor if Donald Trump supports it. It's a big if, but it's also a big concession from a guy who has always supported Second Amendment rights and has always opposed bringing anything to the floor that would restrict the ownership or the sale of firearms. And so for him to make that concession was a big step. What we don't know is what that's going to look like. What bill is that going to be? Lindsey Graham is working on red flag legislation, which would allow local law enforcers to seize guns from those who have been deemed by a judge to be dangerous to themselves or others. NRA opposes that, so for Trump to support it, and he has said several times that he would support that, for Lindsey Graham, the Judiciary Chairman, to be working on it, those are kind of big steps for the Republican Party that has long just walked the line of the NRA. So red flag law could come to the floor, and the House Democrats are working on that. They'll pass that today out of Judiciary. So that's something that they could agree on. And then the background check bill. Pat Toomey and Joe Manchin are working on a bill. Trump has been all over the board. We don't know whether he supports it. One day he supports background checks, the next day he doesn't. So we'll have to see what happens there. But if McConnell makes good on his promise and Trump comes out and supports a background check bill, it wouldn't be H.R. 8. It wouldn't be the Pelosi bill that they've been pushing, which is universal background checks. It would probably be something closer to Manchin-Toomey, which would be a little bit more moderate, a little bit. It would just have more carve-outs, more exceptions, and not everybody would have to go through that screening process trying to protect privacy, trying to protect transfers between family members and things like that. You know, the devil is going to be in the details,
Absolutely.
and the wild card is always
There's
Donald
quite a
Trump.
bit of quibbling
Always.
left to do, especially in red flags, like who qualifies, what qualifies,
Right.
due process, all that.
That's right.
Also, tell us a little bit the situation in North Carolina. This can get very convoluted very quickly. But
Right.
what is the brief? There's going to be a new special election. Why? What's going to happen? And who has the most to lose?
Who's going to win?
Yeah.
You asking me who's going to win? We have Max on the ground right now.
Yeah.
He would be the better guy to ask. You know, the news here is that it's even close.
Yeah.
This is not a race that should be close. This is a Republican district. It's been in Republican hands for 40 years. It was gerrymandered to remain Republican. Trump won it by a dozen
12
points or something like
yeah.
that. So the fact that it's close is of concern for GOP leaders. I think it's a little blown out of proportion that this is some kind of harbinger or bellwether looking ahead to 2020, because these special elections, you know, they get such national attention. So much money is dumped into them. You know, it's essentially a 9-month extension of the campaign.
Yeah.
So there's that much more time to energize voters, and so I don't know that the results tonight are going to be any kind of indicator of what's going to happen in 2020. But if it does flip into Democratic hands, it would be of great concern. To the
Well, I mean, it's enough.
Republican leaders.
It's enough of a concern that Trump actually went to make the case
right.
for the Republican bishop. Let's take a listen to that.
Dan Bishop is a great gentleman, a great man. He's going to be I think he's going to be a great congressman. It was a very close race. I think it's getting less close. If you look at the numbers from 2 weeks ago, and I got involved about 2 weeks ago, and the numbers have gone way up.
So, I mean, I think that what you can say is if Republicans lose here in this solidly of a Republican district, it's a bad sign for them.
It's a terrible sign for them.
If the Democrats lose, but it's close, then you kind of can't say what the indication is.
You cannot, no, but they would certainly like to pick it up. It's one
Of
of those.
course.
It's one of those where
Absolutely.
you know, if we can get this, then you know then we might have a chance at flipping the Senate.
And Bishop has tied himself very closely to Trump as well. I mean,
That's right.
he's like backed up the president and everything and pledged his loyalty and all that stuff.
That's right. But you know, as we said, it's a very conservative district, and Republicans still support Trump. You know, in very, very high numbers,
Right.
up to 80% or something like that. Even as his national numbers are kind of below water. But you know, so there's no indication that Trump would be a liability in a district like this at all.
Absolutely.
Although you know, who knows what all this late breaking news with the Taliban and all of this stuff. Nobody knows what any of that is going to do to this race. But we'll have to look at the exit
Nobody
polls
knows.
tomorrow.
That's the headline.
That's right.
There we
We'll
go.
have to wait and see.
Thank you, Mike. We
Lillis,
appreciate it
thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you
Yeah.
for having me.
Next on Rising, while many say that the war in Afghanistan must end,
There is disagreement on just exactly how. The former deputy chief of the mission in Afghanistan explains how she would withdraw troops and do it responsibly when Rising continues.